crowd tonight. I really have to thank our tonight's speaker, who's Lynn Barber. We had a open up here, and so we had to scramble to find a speaker for this evening, and we just happened to run across Lynn, mutual colleague from the Wausau Bird Club had kind of passed along her information, and this really sounded like an excellent program. So I'll read a little bit about Lynn, and then we'll get ready to get on with her program. So Lynn E. Barber was born in Wisconsin and lived in Alaska, Oregon, North Carolina, Texas, South Dakota, Alaska again, and since 2021, Wisconsin again. Lynn's passion for birding has shown itself in her love of doing birding big years, which she has done in Texas, South Dakota, Alaska, and across the continental US and Canada, aka also known as the big year. She currently holds the record for most birds found in a single year in Texas and Alaska. She will speak on the highlights of her Texas and Alaska and ABA big years, as well as preparation for them. And she will show photographs of some of the birds seen during these years. She's been active in local birding organizations for many years and was past president of the Texas Ornithological Society and the Fort Worth Audubon Society. Lynn is a author and illustrator of Extreme Birder, One Woman's Big Year in 2011, Birds in Trouble in 2016, and Big Years, Big Estates, Birding in Texas and Alaska. So that is a pretty impressive resume there. I'm fascinated. Texas and Alaska are some pretty big places. So I'm really anxious to hear about them. Let's see, I have to make you a co-host here.
I have to be sure I can screen share, but I will wait till you do that.
Okay. Okay, I have granted the permission of being co-host. If just a little bit of the birding I do, and have been into Alaska, my God, that's such a huge state, and getting around. And I know Texas is a big state. Just covering ends to ends, and I'm really interested in your strategy and how all that went. So I think I have granted your permission.
I'll try to screen share, and you can keep talking until we can see if it's going.
Okay, all right. For those of you, how many have seen the movie The Big Year? That's kind of a interesting movie. We actually had a couple of years ago, we had one of the participants, Sandy Comito, who was portrayed in that movie. And this was back in, I think, the 70s, before the internet, and a lot of things. He had, I think it was 700 and some birds in a year, which is just kind of blows my mind away. But
so anyway, let me know when you want me to start. But the way my screen sharing is, I can see it, but I can't see any of you. So can anyone see this thing?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Right. All right. So tell me when you want me to get going on it.
Okay, Lynn.
I'd be happy to take questions if people are unmuted, or or if they want to put them in the chat, and you can.
Yeah. Let's put questions in the chat, and then we'll cover those in the end. And then
and also keep me apprised of when I need to be winding up, because I can talk for forever. So what time should I What time should I be done? I'm getting my watch off here.
Let's see what time it is.
It's like about
Okay.
6:50 or so right now.
Yeah. Wind it up by 8.
Oh, I can do that. Okay. So I have done individual talks on each of these big years, and they can take more than an hour. So this is just a sampler. So, but I'd be happy to answer questions if, if I didn't sample the right thing. So we're going to start from the basics. What is a birder's big year? When I first did an online search of big year, there are big years in every sport there is. So, but this is a birder's big year. And this is me in the middle of one big year that I was trying to be cheerful about. It was miserable. But anyway, so I have a definition. I have a prose definition of a big year, which is it's the basic thing is a calendar year selected by the birder during which the birder birds as much as possible in a selected geographic area. That might be a state like Alaska or Texas. It might be a county. I've done county big years as well. Or I have friends in South Dakota who are doing big years in their yard, and they have a spectacular yard with feeders and water features and things, and they try each year to get more birds in their yard. So that's anything's possible. My poetic definition that I wrote recently is, what's a big year, you might well ask? It's a year when you decide to take on the task of choosing a place, a county or state, and choosing the year and its beginning date, and then abandoning all other things and tallying all avian things. Wings is what it should be at the end of that. Because why on earth would you do it? It can be as fanatic as you wish. Some people do it pretty, they just sort of take a weekend trip every now and then to someplace else and count birds, or you can plan yourself to oblivion. But I think most people wouldn't do it unless they really found it to be fun in some ways, strange or not. So how do I do a big year? Is the answer to this question is I take the area where I'm going to do a big year, all of Texas, all of Alaska, all of the whole US, and I just look at the map and try to figure out what are the challenges going to be? Where am I going to go? What am I going to need to do? Then you have to study the calendar and figure out what birds might be where, when in that area you've chosen. But the most important thing is the last one there is study your credit cards, at least for me. I didn't have the cash to handle any of this stuff, and it's expensive. I have friends here in Wisconsin who do green big years, and that's not so expensive unless the bike tires wear out. But somehow you have to put it all together, whatever kind of big year you've chosen. This is the summary of the summary. The 3 big years. In 2005, that was actually my second Texas big year. The first one, I hadn't intended it to be a big year, but it got out of hand. But it wasn't quite as big as 2005 one. 2008, the ABA area at that time was defined to be the US and Canada, but not including Hawaii. Now it includes Hawaii. And in 2016 was the Alaska big year. And those are the final numbers. But so a little bit of obviousness between the big years. There's a lot of differences between the big years. There's similarities, of course, you're running around in whatever territory, but the size of the territory, Alaska being, a couple times the size of Texas and having hardly any roads made a huge difference. And the ABA area, of course, including them both and then some. Because of the differences in latitude and longitude of the areas of these 3 different areas, it makes a huge difference on what the weather is going to be, what the climate's going to be, what the possible birds could be, and the climate, of course, and how you can get around whether it's going to be pouring on you the whole time you're there, whether you're going to be able to get there because of the snow, the geography of it, mountains, rivers, lakes, oceans, what you have to go to see the birds, and how remote they are. In Alaska, that's the worst part. You couldn't drive hardly anywhere. You had to fly anywhere you were going to go, which made a huge difference. And then, so how you have to bird is a big difference. In Texas, I never got on a plane the whole year. In Alaska, I hardly left a plane. And then the first of those years was in 2005, when I didn't really have any kind of access to bird data by phone. I had a cell phone, but there were not apps. There were not ways for people. The eBird didn't happen on the phone, on my phone anyway. And things increased a lot. People that had done big years in Texas before me, many of them, the only way they found out about birds was to go find a payphone and call their friends and find out if they had seen anything. Huge difference. And then from 2005 to 2016, I got older, and we all got older. And so I was fairly well along in 2016 compared to 2005, which made it a little bit more challenging. So to Texas. Those red lines are the major highways I drove in Texas to do my big year. I lived in Fort Worth, which is in the upper portion of the state, and upper central portion. And so basically I had to go a long way to get anywhere, to get to see anything. I started that big year by going all around Texas, from the north central Texas down to the southeast coast, down to the lower Rio Grande Valley and the bottom of the state, up the western side of the state, over and down to Big Bend on the western southwest, and then all the way up to the Panhandle up in the north and back down to Fort Worth in 10 days. And when I mentioned this at an Audubon meeting in December of the previous year, a friend of mine, who I actually hardly knew very well, said, "That sounds wonderful. Can I go along with you?" And so she joined me in that 10-day trip and got the bug, and she ended up doing a big year as well. She sort of got less interested in it towards the end of the year and didn't quite get as many birds as I did, but she and I think 2 others of the people who did big years that year all broke the previous record. So it was an excellent year, and a lot of us worked really hard. One of the first best birds was a crimson collared grosbeak, which regularly at the previous couple of years and that year and some years since had come to the lower Rio Grande Valley, Texas. And that's the male eating potato vine or something like that, leaves. And orioles are all over Texas. So lots of good orioles in Texas. So of course you get orioles in the winter, and it doesn't matter when. And green jays are standard good Texas birds that aren't seen much anyplace else in the United States. A friend of mine had been out to the way far west Texas and had seen long-eared owls out there and reported them. And so I decided to try for them after the first 10 days. This is another separate trip. And they were almost impossible to find. they were really hard, and we tromped around. And actually, these are in the Panhandle, in a little valley, heavily brushed valley in winter with no leaves on the trees, but they were so well hidden until we started walking around, and crashing around up the little hill from them. They didn't fly away, and then they flew out, as did a harrier. Roadrunners are, not easy to find in Texas, but they're all over the place in the southern part, south and western part. These pictures show that Texas does indeed have snow. It's not Wisconsin, of course, but it does have snow. And in the Guadalupe Mountains, where if you climb up some areas of the mountains, there's snow in wintertime particularly. And there's a place called the Bowl up on top of one of the Guadalupe trails that I walked up this area, and I had driven down below in the morning before and seen the white tops of the mountains and sort of thought maybe it was clouds and didn't realize it was snow. I had my hiking shoes on, but not waterproof boots. By the time I got up about 2/3 of the way up, the snow was, up over my ankles. And by the time I got to the top, it was almost up to my knees, and it was getting to be warm. And by the time I started hiking my way down, it had melted underneath and was like ice water puddles underneath the snow. And 2 people were hiking up the mountain at that same time, and they were prepared, and they hiked up, and they didn't have binoculars on. They said hi, and they were very cheery. And so finally I had a conversation with them as I was slowly going down, and they were chomping back past me. And I asked them if they were birders ever at all, although they didn't have binoculars. And they said no, but they said their son was. And it turned out their son was the head of the Texas Rare Bird Record Committee, which was going to be making decisions on whether my rare birds were countable or not. So I was glad I was friendly to them, and I told them to say hi to their son for me. In the lower southeast Gulf Coast area of Texas, these are birds that nest, and by the time these are coming in, both great egrets and roseate spoonbill, there's the High Island area is spectacular in spring, and well worth a visit, even if you don't even care about any birds but the big birds. These are big birds, and they're easy to see and beautiful. And then back out to West Texas, scaled quails run around under the bushes in the dry deserty areas, sometimes pop up and let themselves be photographed. Up in the Guadalupes, there are spotted owls, which I had learned in 2003. And you hike and you hike and you hike and you hike up this particular trail that's supposed to have them. And I got all the way up there and walked through these canyon areas on the trails, which are not too bad a trail. I got all the way up to the top and nothing, no owls, no nothing. And turned around to come back, and I heard rustling in the bushes, and there are mountain lions in those same hills. And I heard rustling in the bushes on the ground. And I thought, oh my God, I didn't have a weapon other than my hiking stick and or my binoculars. I guess I could swing at something. And on the ground was a white fluffy ball that was a young spotted owl. And up in the trees were two adult spotted owls, none of which ever paid any attention to me at all. But it was a wonderful trip. Out in Southwest Texas, in the Big Bend area, vermilion flycatchers are relatively easy to see. The females are lighter, pinker, but they're both beautiful birds. Towards the end, in December of that year, a snow bunting was reported in Texas, which is not common. And this one was down all the way down in the bottom of Texas, in the very, very bottom Brownsville area, South Padre Island specifically. And so on Christmas morning, way before dawn, like 3 a.m, I drove down to Texas because that's when I was free and when the bird was there. I get all the way down, which is about 550 miles from my home in North Texas at the time. And I get to South Padre Island, and it's Christmas, and there are a few camper vans and things around, but it's still pretty early in the morning. And there was nobody around, not a soul, except then I saw one woman, and she had a camera on a tripod, and she was aiming at this bird. And this was a snow bunting that was hopping around on the campground in South Padre Island, and it would not leave the shadows. It was hot, and this bird is a snow bunting, and it was really confused. It did not expect to be in a hot land, and it was trying very hard to be as cool as it could. So it was nice to see. It was one of my last birds for that year. So just a few statistics for the year. I drove approximately 90,000 miles that year on 3 different cars. I ran one into the ground, had a rental car, and then got another one. I kept in those days, I kept track of miles walked, and I had a pedometer on my waist, and so that's my miles walked. I calculated hours birding because I wrote down every time I started and stopped, and it turned out that 35% of all of the hours of the year, day and night, I spent birding. And then I got hours per bird, miles per day, hours per day, miles per bird, bunches of them, all of them. Okay, that's the first big year I'm talking about tonight. The second one in 2008 was of the ABA area at that time that did not include Hawaii. It still doesn't include Greenland or Mexico, but nowadays, if you do what's called an ABA big year, you're allowed to put Hawaii in that, and you do. So that's the area. And where I went that year, I think that's 23 states, but I've forgotten the count, and 3 different provinces I went that year, somewhere in them. But oddly enough, not Wisconsin. And these are the flight paths, my flight paths that year that I took. I went up to Alaska 4 times. I went to Newfoundland once. I went to California 3 or 4 times, Florida 4 times, up to Minnesota and to Michigan, but as I said, not Wisconsin. And a lot of time in Texas, of course, this is where I lived and where you can get, as I knew from my previous year, you can get 500 species just in Texas if you try hard enough. So I started it, of course, in Texas. And these are some of the birds that I got in Texas. You know, there's a whole overlap, of course, because of my Texas big year, same area, same birds. And then in Minnesota, I went primarily for great gray owls and I got the blackback and three-toed woodpeckers. Went primarily to the Sax-Zim bog, but on the drive back to the airport, a friend of mine from Texas, a woman, went along with me, and we had heard about white-winged crossbills. And so we made a detour to a little wooded area and drove around and found a huge flock of white-winged crossbills, sort of our last in Minnesota for that trip. And then still in January, went to Arizona. In my pre-planning for the trip, I pre-planned trips by primarily by using Post-it notes and making a little note saying, you know, I need to go to Arizona for the Aztec thrush in August. That was the plan. But it turned out an Aztec thrush showed up in Arizona in December, actually. So I decided to go for it then, not wait till August. And so did get it. And that was the primary. There were other rare birds around then in Arizona, but I didn't get any of them. And I had reserved a place at the Morro Bay, California Bird Festival to get some California endemics and good birds. And so I was on my way. The Arizona trip was on my way to California, where I got the yellow-billed magpie. And I got a bunch of other good birds in California, but yellow-billed magpie is only there. Back through Arizona, these two birds I had missed on my way going out to California, which both had been reported. The rufous-backed robin was not only I could not find it on the way out, I couldn't even find the park where it was supposed to be found. But on the way back, I worked a little harder and found the park, found the bird. The crescent-chested warbler was a whole nother matter. That was up on the top of one of the mountains in southeast Arizona and had been reported. And I trooped all the way up there, and I'm not really good at climbing up mountains. My oxygen utilization is subpar, and got all the way to the top. And there are a lot of birders up there, all looking in different directions, which is not a good sign. They're all looking for the bird. They're not on the bird. I looked around with them for a while, but then, you know, there were other birds. It's only one species. A lesson to be learned doing a big year is that every bird counts the same. A house sparrow and a crescent-chested warbler count exactly the same. It's just one. So you can't get too carried away and fret over missing a bird. So I thought, okay, not going to get it. And I started my way down the mountain, and I'm about a third of the way down, and I heard this clattering of feet behind me, and a guy comes running up. He said, "You that woman that's doing a big year?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "We found the crescent-chested warbler." I thought, oh, good, I get to climb back up. So I climbed back up, and everybody's still, when I get there, everybody else is looking around like they aren't seeing it again. But I found it that time, and it was with some juncos, and there was a little flock of birds, and it was one of them, and everybody got to see it. That was up there then. That was wonderful. In February, it's almost any time you do a big year, February is a sort of slow time. You kill yourself in January and get everything that's around, and nothing yet is coming in from through migration. And so I'm in February. In 2008, I'm in a grocery store, wandering around, getting groceries, you know, being, you know, dutiful and, you know, getting ready for supper time and not birding. And my cell phone rings, and a friend of mine says, "There's a blue bunting in South Texas." And I thought, well, you know, they're pretty regular. I guess I can get it, but I'm not going to go now. And I get down another aisle in the grocery store, and my cell phone rings again, and there's another birder friend, and she said, "There's something called an Alania in South Texas." And I thought, this was not in my list of things I thought I might get for my big year. So I said, okay. And I, you know, finished getting my groceries, checked out, went home, called my husband and said, "Supper is going to be really quick tonight. I'm heading for the valley. I'm heading for the valley." The 8-hour drive, whatever it is. And so I did. I got down to South Padre Island, which is where the Elenia had been reported. And it was 3 a.m. And I just pulled in, and as there were a couple other people sleeping in their cars, and we all just sat there waiting for daylight and dozed if we could. And the daylight came and we got out of our cars. There's like 4 or 5 of us, and looked over this little wooden rail fence that was around the area. That's a little area that somebody had kept for birds, had oranges in it and the water, and it was a good little area that attracted birds well. And I'd been there before, and in the half light, we could all see this little flycatchery thing flying around. And when it got light, we could see it had this white little crest on its head. And it turned out the officials, the people that know birds really well, identified it as a white-crested Elenia, one of the best birds, maybe the best bird of my big year that year. And every time I saw other birders later in the year and told them I was doing a big year, they'd say, "Did you get that Elenia?" Because people came from all over the United States, and it stayed less than a day. So that was one of those things. Florida periodically gets banana quits from the Caribbean, and I already had a trip planned to Florida, and I went down, and that's one of the birds that I got. They sort of like hummingbirds in that they probe into flowers, but they are not hummingbirds. Then a really good birding friend of mine in Texas was asking me how my birding was going, and I said fine, and she said, you know that there's a mango that's been in Georgia. And I said, yeah, I know, but it came last year, and it's not going to stay. I mean, I don't want to race over to Georgia and then, and she says, well, do you have anything else to chase? And oh, well, no. So I got on a plane, went to Georgia, flew to Georgia, and contacted the guy whose yard it was in, and met him there. I got my rental car and immediately drove to his house and got the mango. I already had planned to stay overnight, figuring I wouldn't get it the first day. So I went back the second day and looked at it again, but it was another really good bird for the year. Then I had a chicken trip, as I called it, to Colorado in April, when all sorts of chicken type birds can be found. And I got all of them on that trip. The trip, I planned 8 days in Colorado for these grouse. The first day I went to Gunnison, Colorado for the Gunnison sage grouse, which I had never seen, and which there was a huge blizzard, and they closed the area where the Gunnison sage grouse can be found. So although I got into Gunnison following a snowplow, because it was the only way I could drive was wait for a plow to come through, I couldn't get to the area where the Gunnison sage grouse were. So I had made motel reservations for every night. So I just moved on to the next night, and got all the other birds, the prairie chickens, and on the way I'd gotten lesser prairie chicken in the Texas Panhandle. And I had 1 day left at the end that I had not planned, and I went back to Gunnison, and the roads had cleared and you could get in, and I got the Gunnison sage grouse, but they were distant. There were like 30 of them out on the grounds, displaying. But the greater sage grouse are everywhere and easy to be seen where they're supposed, in the areas they're found, they're easy to be seen, and photographed. Then back to Florida, where migration was starting, and I went out, get everything possible in South Florida, basically. And these are some of the warblers that I got, mostly on the mainland and not in the Keys, but I also went out to the Keys, took a pelagic out there. Okay, at that time, I did not live in Alaska. I lived in Texas, and it was time to go to Alaska. I had been to Alaska a couple of times, and one of my favorite, probably my favorite place, all of Alaska, maybe most of the US, to bird is on St. Paul Island. And St. Paul Island does tours, and they have these buses, and they have guides who are hired to guide you around. You can take a commercial field trip there, in which case you have that guide and the guide that is hired by the St. Paul Island tour people, but I've always gone independently, and I love going there, and would love to tell anybody about how wonderful how to do it and what's done, although I suppose the pandemic has changed things a lot. One of the things that I was able to get was a McKay's bunting that had there were some friends of mine by coincidence who also were at St. Paul at the same time as I was. And McKay's bunting had been reported on St. Paul Island, and we all raced after it, and we got a picture of it. And then somebody decided it was a hybrid, which if you're doing a big year, a hybrid is not really good news because it ain't one and it ain't the other. It's neither thing. And so I was sort of disappointed. I told people I was going to count it as a half a bird. I was going to be the only person with a big year with a, some number and a half species seen. But later I did get a McKay's bunting, and this is the one that I got that was not a hybrid. And then I took a commercial bird trip with Wilderness Birding Adventures to go to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the goal being the gray-headed chickadee, which is the only place that's known to be found findable, easily findable in the US. It's also in the Yukon territories, but less easily findable. And actually nowadays it's difficult anywhere. But later, after this whole year was over and I talked to other big year birders ABA area, they could not imagine why I spent 7.5 days for one species. They would have, as I told you, it counts for one, but I wanted to see it. So you make your own decisions on these kind of things. And there it is. It looks pretty much like a chickadee, except it's lighter headed, lighter capped. Then to Arizona, where you have to in late summer be there for all the wonderful, wonderful different kinds of hummingbirds. West Texas has basically the same ones, but it's not as well organized and accessible usually. Then, and back, I was trying for spotted owl. Owls are sort of my favorite of all things, bird-wise, and I really wanted a spotted owl. I'd seen them in the past, non-big years, and I'd been in 2008 multiple times looking for them. and Sheelike Canyon is one of the places where all the bird groups used to go to find them. But that year, none of the bird groups are finding spotted owls there, and it was very muddy and rainy, and you'd see people coming back from trying to get spotted owls, just drenched and muddy and yucky everything, but nobody was getting them. I went back, I think it was my third time trying for spotted owls, and went up Miller Canyon, where they're supposed to be that year. And I had gone up looking and didn't find them, and talked to some people that were down in the visitor area about my quest for spotted owl, and then went off birding other someplace else and got a couple other species. And my cell phone rang, and one of the women who had paid attention to my quest called me, and she said, they've refound the spotted owls. So I raced back, and it is really good that most of the police force was looking for other people than speeders, and they're probably looking for people crossing illegally or whatever. Anyway, they weren't paying attention to me as I sped back to Miller Canyon, got back to the parking area, and the woman who had called me was there, and she said, "You want me to go up with you?" I said, "Oh, please." So we get all the way towards where she said they were, and she said, "They're around here somewhere." And I'm going, "Oh God, it's a wild goose chase for an owl." And then right over our heads, these two birds are sitting. They were young ones. You can see they have feather down sticking out of their feathers periodically. And so they're young of the year. And while we watched, that one that is shown in the picture on the left coughed up a pellet. And I have in a little Ziploc bag somewhere in all our belongings, that pellet as a souvenir of my big year, which is, a sort of oddball thing. But anyway, I do. And these two birds, I ended up painting them. And if you have a copy of or get a copy of my first book, my painting of them is on the cover. All right, another trip to Alaska. This time to go all the way up to the top to what was then called Barber, is now called Utqiagvik. And you go up there primarily for these two gulls. A good birding friend of mine from Texas said she would love to go along with me. She wanted ivory gull, Ross's gull, and polar bear. So that's what these three pictures are, and we got all three. I had never been up there to look for Ross's gull, and we had 2 days up there. And the first day we saw them, we called them pinkies, as you can tell. They are pink, light pink, the adults, and they mostly go by the opposite direction this one is shown, from left to right, because you're facing north, looking out over the water, and they're almost all going westish to eastish. And the first day we didn't count, but the second day we determined we would count them. And by the end of the day, we had counted something like 1,300 of them going by, mostly going in the same direction, probably not double counting anything. Every now and then they would come down to the water, but mostly they were just heading past. It was wonderful. That's usually the first, or really in the second week of October as they go by. In my Alaska big year, they didn't. In my Alaska big year, there were none. No, yeah, right. Yeah, no, of ivory gull, there were none. All right. Towards the end of the year, I had a friend that I'd met doing my big year in Colorado, and he said he would take me up for white-tailed ptarmigan. And so I drove up from Fort Worth to Denver area and met him, and we drove up into the mountains. It was like gale force winds happening, and there was snow everywhere, and this is a white bird, and this particular picture happens to have some grass around it, but so we couldn't find anything, and so he headed off in one direction. He gave me a walkie-talkie. He said, call me if you see anything. And he headed off and disappeared, and we're both wandering around looking for ptarmigan, and I nearly stepped on one. And instead of using my walkie-talkie, I yelled, and he thought I had broken a leg. He came running from wherever he was, and then he got to see them. He hadn't seen any yet either. We had 4 or 6 of them. And so oops, back. Summary of that year: 723 species that were seen in the ABA area. And I took photographs of 503, which I thought was pretty good. I also kept track of how many I saw in the lower 48, not Alaska or Canada, and how many were seen in Texas, even though I spent a lot of time out of it. And instead of 90,000 miles, I only drove 65,000 miles because I was flying a lot. And then the numbers walked and flown. And so it's 25 states I birded and 3 provinces. The main province that I got good birds in is Newfoundland area, Newfoundland. I went up to Ontario and did not get the boreal owl I was looking for, and did not get a boreal owl at all that year. And you'll note that the number of days I was not birding, except at home, was only 94 that year. And the last bird of the species of the year was rufous-capped warbler in southeast Arizona. All right, one more. Alaska. So as I said, Alaska is like 3 times, well, 2.5 times bigger than Texas, but hardly any roads. I've marked with blue dots the main areas I went, a couple areas I went there on there. I did go to Delta Junction, which doesn't have blue dot, it's hardly exists, and down to Kodiak. I went to Dutch Harbor. I went to all the places with names on them there. And then because Southeast Alaska is so full of little towns and hard to put on a map, there's a sort of an inset that I pulled off the internet of the cities that are down there, many of which I went to. So, all right. I did not plan to go to Kodiak. Kodiak is island off the southern coast of Alaska. And I thought, island birds, I'll get pretty much the same things on someone going to some other islands. But then in very, very late December of 2015, a report came in of a common pochard, a bird that I had not seen and did not know could come into the US, seen on a lake in Kodiak Island. So I contacted the guy who had reported it, and he said he'd be happy to see me. So I spent New Year's Eve of 2015 in a hotel on Kodiak Island with me and probably one other person in the whole hotel. And that's me leaving my home in December to go down there. And then I met him, and he and his car and my rental car, drove to this lake. And the first bird of the year was bald eagle, because it's impossible to be in Kodiak without seeing bald eagles everywhere. I would have liked to see the pochard as #1, but bald eagles are pretty good. And then the common pochard was bird #2 of the year. The little arrow up above on the map up on the top shows sort of where Kodiak is. So as I said, I hadn't planned to spend any time in Kodiak Island, but I spent 2 days not knowing if I'd get the partridge the first day, and I ended up getting 52 species on that island in the 1 day. And the 2 days, here's a couple of the other ones that were on the island. Emperor geese winter on Kodiak Island. I had sort of neglected to realize that, and if I had, I would have planned to go to Kodiak Island because it's sort of hard to find them elsewhere. You can see them, but they're easy there. And this picture is not taken on Kodiak Island. I saw a crested auklet there with a no picture. This is a different, this is from St. Paul Island. This auklet is. Ketchikan is in southeast Alaska, as you can see the little arrow up by the map. And there's a man down there who is a saint to birders. He loves, you know, he has a wonderful yard, and the dipper wasn't in his yard, but the flicker and the varied thrush were in his yard, and lots of birds were in the yard. Every time I went to Ketchikan during the year, which was multiple times, I visited his yard, and usually there was something rare there. I would note that the varied thrush is a special bird to me because during my Texas big year, I got a varied thrush. Of course, they're in Alaska as here, but also now in Wisconsin, I've had numerous days with a varied thrush in my yard. So it's a very special bird to me. I've seen it just about the extremes of all of its habitats. American dippers I've got later in this show, hopefully it'll work, I've got a video of an American dipper. Anyway, one of the neat things about birders, and especially in Alaska, where you have to find somebody, you have to go to these remote places that you can't just sort of wander casually into. You have to make a big effort and fly there. There were a lot of birders, almost 1 or 2 in every area I wanted to go, who were well aware of their surroundings and the birds in them, and were very happy to help me, often to take off from whatever they would have normally been doing, and to bird with me. I appreciated them. They were amazing. All right, this is the dipper. I guess it is right now. Let's see if this works. That's ice, by the way, in case you can't tell. He's got a little minnowy thing. I don't know what it is. So I really love Wisconsin. I love that we have winters here, but I do miss dippers. All right, next, in Anchorage. As I said, there were a lot of really good birders willing to share information, and the spruce grouse, which is quite common but not easily found around in the woods around Anchorage. This particular bird, one of my birding friends had found, and he and his little son and another birder and I all went out, and this spruce grouse did not want to leave the path that it was on. It was part of its territory, and it was picking at the walking stick of one of us, and basically wouldn't leave the area. Northern hawk owls are relatively easily found in spruce forests around Anchorage and north of there. Some winters better than others. And the boreal owl, that winter, there were at least 3 boreal owls that I was able to see in the Anchorage area that winter. The man who owns Wilderness Birding Adventures, the wonderful birding group that does commercial tours, is a friend, and he lives in Homer, and told me that they had a brambling coming to somebody's yard with juncos. And so I flew down to Homer and got my rental pickup truck and and he and I went to these people's yard. We get to the door and they open it and they just sort of wave us in, and they have chairs set up at their back window where the juncos are coming in to feed seed they're putting out, and in there came a brambling. This is a different brambling. This is a brambling from out on the outer islands, which I got much better pictures of. It was sort of at dusk when I got the ones in Homer. Gray-crowned rosy finches winter in Homer. They're also very common elsewhere in the state, but they winter down there. In February, one of my birding friends told me about a saw-whet owl that he had found, and took me back out to it, and there it was, it just peering down at us. He also located this particular great horned owl, which is not rare and is pretty easy to find, but it was a wonderful one that was easy to see. Willow ptarmigans are normally more easily seen not in Anchorage, but up in the hills around Anchorage. The Anchorage is in a bowl with the mountains all around it, and up in the hills there's willow ptarmigan, as all three ptarmigan are up there. I saw that a man in Sitka had reported a wood duck, which is very, very uncommon, if not rare, in Alaska. So I flew to Sitka, and here was this wood duck at this lake in Sitka. And I was so excited to see it. It was hanging around with a female mallard, and it turned out I needn't have rushed. It stayed there the whole year. And I went back to Sitka for other birds and got to see the wood duck multiple times, also always with a female mallard. I don't know anything about their relationship, though. Kenai is down south by road. You can drive to Kenai from Anchorage. And I went there numerous times, and one of the times there were short-eared owls are regular. There's some big plains near some fish cannery areas, but there's also some big open marshy areas, and the short-eared owls can be found there. Another place, in addition, that I had not at all thought I would ever go to is Delta Junction. Delta Junction, as you see by the arrow, is in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. It is accessible by road, oddly enough. And it's if you keep going on that road, you can leave Alaska and out the east side of Alaska. But when I told people I was doing a big year, they'd say, well, you'll be going to Delta Junction, won't you? And I thought, yeah, why? Well, it turns out sharp-tailed grouse nest there, rough grouse nest there, both of which are difficult, if not impossible, to find in much of the rest of the state. So I went there and got them both. In the Juneau area, a birder friend of mine was getting Rufous hummingbird coming to her feeders. We actually had a Rufous hummingbird come to our feeder, not a male, however, a female, but this is the male that was coming to her feeder. And in Ketchikan, which is also down down in the same area as Juneau, you have to fly down there to southeast, both of them. You have to fly different flights because there's no roads connecting anything down there. But in Ketchikan, then there was red-breasted sapsucker, which is relatively common down in the southeastern Alaska. Back down to Homer, which is by road south of Anchorage, where it's shorebird time, when things are coming in. And I was told that if I didn't get marbled godwit by the end of May, forget it. It comes through then sometimes, and you better work hard for it. Wandering tattler, however, is easily found in many areas. Adak is way out the Aleutian chain, as you can see from the map. And the owner of Wilderness Birding Adventures is standing next to that sign that says you are now entering and leaving the Adak National Forest. The Adak National Forest is a planting of about 7 or 8 spruce trees that has grown up. Those are the only trees on Adak. And so they call it the National Forest. Rock ptarmigan are everywhere on the island, and tufted duck are regular on the island. I was happy to get the tufted duck that was down in Milwaukee here in Wisconsin this year, but it was not a beautiful male like this. So more island birds: red-faced cormorant, tufted puffin. coastal birds. Red-faced cormorant is found on a number of islands, including Adak in Alaska, but nowhere else. St. Paul Island, again, I showed you the picture of the St. Paul Island tour bus that I went to in my Alaska, in my ABA big year. This is from my Alaska big year. These are some pictures taken out there on St. Paul Island. One of the reasons, I mean, the reason I really love St. Paul Island is the accessibility, ease of access to cliff nesting birds. You get out of the bus. You can't drive your own car out there. It's all owned by the native corporation, and you need to go on their facilities. But you get out of the bus, you walk, 100 feet or something across sometimes difficult terrain, but flat terrain. And then you look down, and there's these cliffs. They're there, and the birds are there in May, late May, early June. Down in Southeast Alaska, again, you can see the arrow, almost to the bottom of Southeast Alaska, walking distance from British Columbia, and therefore birds from the lower 48 are most likely to be in Hyder, Alaska. And if you're doing an Alaska big year, you got to get those birds that are normal lower 48 birds. And so I added, I actually can't remember how many, 20 or so new birds in a 4-day trip to Hyder, because they were all birds that you really couldn't get in the rest of the state. So these are them, some of them. So one of the birder from Ketchikan and my birding friend and I, the three of us, went to Hyder, and we rented a car and stayed in a motel that I understand no longer is, and took our little rental car and walked mostly. But so there's a black-throated gray warbler sort of in the center of that leafy picture, and then there's a magnolia warbler sort of in the center of the other one. Back to Juneau. Two species that I didn't get anywhere else in the state, but there were at least 2 singing male red-eyed vireos in Juneau that year, and Tennessee warbler. I guess they're regular, but you've got to go down there to get them, and they might not find them. There is a place called Chicken, Alaska. It's way up along the border, Yukon Territory border, and it's off the beaten track. But I had heard that there were actually a couple of birds I could try to get up there. But one of them was mountain bluebird. One of the birders in Delta Junction plays in a bluegrass band, and he and his son had been in Chicken, Alaska, and his son had found these blue birds. And so the guy in Delta Junction told me about them, and so I drove up there. And that thing that the bluebird is coming out of is some sort of gold mining apparatus, that old ruin in Chicken, Alaska. It's an old mining town primarily, and a tourist town now. So there was a pair of mountain bluebirds there. They come through Juneau area normally in April, and I had been in Juneau looking for them, but they came a week early that year, and by the time I got there, they had come through, and so this is finally I got onto them. Up to Utqiagvik Barrow area to get multiple birds. I think the only new bird I got that trip was snowy owls, but they nest on the tundra up there. Gamble is another island, not near St. Paul Island, and it's very close to Russia. And you can on some days see Russia from there. And in the fall, or in Alaska, that's like late August, the only time you can get sharp-tailed sandpipers is late August, early September on the outer islands, sometimes on the coast. And so I went to St. Lawrence Island, which is where Gamble is, and got sharp-tailed sandpiper. And then that year, and quite often, Siberian accenters come through them, are around in the end of summer. And that year, that I said I didn't get ivory gull. I did get Ross's gull in early October. And these are the pinkies. They're usually far off and hard to get in focus. Now, oddly enough, for my Alaska big ear, I got a tropical kingbird. This was again on Sitka, and the guy that was reporting lots of good things reported the tropical kingbird, and I and another friend flew down to Sitka, and we spent a day, almost a day, not finding it, but finally got onto it. It was just flitting around and, you know, fly catching and sometimes hard to find. Now, these are two more birds, and well, the one on the left is from Sitka. The Cape May warbler came in and flew down to Sitka again for the Cape May warbler. And then Petersburg, I had not been to Petersburg, but it's also down on the southeast. And a Lewis's woodpecker came in. I hadn't shown a picture, but in Texas, at the very end of my Texas big year, a Lewis's woodpecker came into Western Texas, and they're not very common out there. They're periodic, but Alaska, they are rare. And this one came in, and as you can see, it's sitting on something that doesn't look like a branch. What it's sitting on is a dowel. It had come to a crabapple tree and was eating the apples, and it's freezing. It's, you know, winter time. And the guy who found it went to the hardware store, got a dowel, went to the grocery store, got some apples and skewered the apples and put them up in the crabapple tree so the woodpecker would have something to eat that was more substantial than his little dried up crab apples. And so my next slide, I should show us what the woodpecker was doing. You can see he's eating the apples, but you got to see it happen. So here we go. Let's see if we can get that. And I think you can hear ravens in the background. They're frozen apples. He's like boing, 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 boing. But you can hear the background noise also. There was traffic going by all the time. It's right on a city street, it's a small city, but a street. All right, the last exciting bird was on St. Lawrence Island, Gamble. That year, there were 4 people doing ABA big years. This is my Alaska big year, but there were 4 people doing ABA big years, and they were all everywhere in Alaska at the same time I was, and I met them all. The woman that was doing it, Laura Keene, said, I had heard about this pine bunting on St. Lawrence Island, and I was sort of tired of traveling and thought, whatever. And she emailed me and she said, are you going to go for the pine bunting? And I said, I don't know. And she said, you want to room with me? So I met her and at the airport, and we went to gamble at the pine bunting. And a pine bunting is a bird I'd not been aware existed. It comes from Siberia or Russia or somewhere out there. And you can see in the upper right, the terrain out there at Gamble where we were all wandering around, and where the pine bunting was hopping around. The guy who had found it, who was a native man who is a birder, and we all chipped in and buy him binoculars when his binoculars went out, because he's a heaven sent person out there for birders. They're chasing rarities. But he had put out seed for the pine bunting, so you sometimes could find it near the seed that he had put out. Okay, one more video, and then we'll have some questions. This is, I went back down to Ketchikan looking for a swamp sparrow, which I did get, but I didn't get a picture. But I got this bird, which was, of course, your Wilson snipe. It was, and I just loved it. And you try to imagine that it's got some sort of earpiece in, and it's listening to music, because it's clearly bopping around to it. He's right in the ditch, right beside the road, and I'm just taking a picture out the car window. All right. So the number of species that year were 307. And you note my note about not including rock pigeon. A member of the Alaska Bird Record Committee, who is a professor up in Fairbanks, has decreed, and his word is the rule, that you can't count rock pigeon in Alaska, even though they nest on the cliffs south of Anchorage. And the reason being that they're there because of man bringing them there and maintaining them and feeding them. So really it was 308. All right, we'll go on to that. Okay, 3 books that were mentioned are here. This is pictures of the covers. And should you be interested in them, of course, I'd be delighted to send you one or bring you one or whatever. And so they're listed there, and there's my contact information. And I'd be happy to take questions. Someone there?
Wonderful, wonderful presentation. Okay, we'll start with the questions. Okay, we got 14 comments. Let's see if I can. And if you have any questions, type them in. We're going to go through them one by one.
So if anybody wants my contact information, put it down, and then I'll take the slide sharing thing away so we can all see each other again. All right.
Okay. Where's my chat?
Of course, everybody's all muted and unseeable, but anyway.
Okay. Somebody really likes dippers. I can certainly agree. I spent in Yellowstone National Park. There was a bridge to the prismatic pool. There was a dipper there, and I think I took between 200 and 300 photographs of it. I was trying to see what it was eating, and it was I think it's all caddisfly larvae, isn't it? What they totally
I don't know, this little one that I had the video of, he was eating some little fishy looking thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but yeah, I probably rival you on at least number of pictures I've taken of the dipper. I mean, I cannot pass a dipper without taking a picture of it. I mean, that is just not a possible thing.
So Mary asks, what's your perspective on counting birds that you only hear?
The ABA rule is you may do so. I tried not to, but I have done it. I mean, you know, right this minute. I mean, not this right minute. This year, you know, there's a great horned owl that periodically crawls in our woods behind our house. I haven't yet to see it. And if I were concerned about counting, birds this year, I count it anyway. I mean, I know it's a great horned owl. I wouldn't count anything if I was dubious about the identity of it, but and if I know there's not any starlings around that are making it sound like, a great horned owl or whatever. I mean, you have to be pretty confident that what you're thinking you're hearing is really what you're hearing. But I do count heard birds. Some people don't, but actually I went on a birding trip once with 2 guys who only counted birds if they could see the whole bird. This was an owl trip, and we were seeing lots of owls sticking their heads out of holes. They wouldn't count any of them because they couldn't see the whole bird. So you make up your own rules. I count birds that are heard if I'm sure that that's what they are.
So Hakeem says, asks, have you ever birded the Flathead Lake area in western Montana?
No, I don't think so. No. I haven't birded too much in Montana. I've driven through it a lot, but I haven't spent much time there.
I've been close. I've been to the bison range in Montana. So, did you move all? Somebody asked, did you move all over to follow birding or because of work?
Yes. My husband has, for various reasons, decided for his particular profession's career to want to change locations, and because we are a partnership, I basically only let him apply for jobs where I want to go birding. So I mean, he has applied for a few that thank goodness he didn't get, that weren't high on birds. But I wanted to go out west, and so when we were in North Carolina, he applied for jobs out west, in Fort Worth is where we got to. He also interviewed that year in California. We might have been there, but we got Texas, and so it's just a combination. But coming back to Wisconsin is because we decided we wanted to be in a part of the world where it wasn't dark so much in the winter. We didn't mind winter so much. It's just we didn't want it so dark all the time. So we decided to come back to Wisconsin, and by absolute happenstance, we ended up in Wausau, which is where I was born, but that was not the actual original plan. So
Awesome. So Jane says, do you need to take a picture of the bird to count it?
You really don't, but when I was in Texas, the Bird Record Committee is really strong there, and they pay attention to who's counting birds. And so I submitted rare bird reports to them for every bird that they deemed rare, and they had a list. And to help my case, I submitted a photograph, if possible. And so I guess I'm always worried that people won't believe that I've seen a bird. So I try to take pictures so that if anybody says, did you really? Yes, here, see, I can show them. But legally, you don't have to. I mean, there's no rule anywhere that says that. It just helps make your case if you're trying to make a case to somebody about it.
Next question, Jan asked, how much help did you receive to plan your trips?
None, no. No, I mean, I studied books. I rarely used outside people to plan trips. I mean, every now and then, like in Alaska, I hired Wilderness Birding Adventures for a couple of places. So I guess planning a trip, they did that part of it then. But mostly I read the local guide or the books or covering the area I wanted to bird, and tried to figure out from them when to go and where to go in each place. And then, nowadays, of course, you can go on the internet and do a lot of looking around, but originally it was a lot of, making phone calls and trying to find things. So
Steve asked, am I correct that your Alaska big year is the record big year for Alaska? Is that still?
As far as I know, it turns out when I did it, I talked to a number of people who had done a lot of birding in the state, and who told me what, to the best of their knowledge, was the previous record, because it turns out that, as far as anybody knew, I was the first person in Alaska to try to actually do a big year, which is a little strange to think about. But most of the people who are fanatic birders work on a job where they bird, like they're guides, or they're the one of the people that was in charge of the birders at St. Paul Island had one of the highest lists, because he would get all their birds during the summer on St. Paul Island, and he'd spend the rest of the year wandering around birding and doing birding odd jobs. But so he knew about his totals. And then there was two people who were deceased, who people were pretty sure what their records totals were, but neither of them had been doing a big year per se. They had been doing, jobs that they got to go outside and bird a lot. And so everybody said I was basically setting the bottom line of what you could do, that people could try to, get better than that. But to my knowledge, nobody has really tried much. And then part of the problem was right after that, the pandemic, not long after that, the pandemic happened. And I know a couple of people were going to do big years that year, and then things closed down and they couldn't get any place. So I don't know what happened then. I'm sort of lost track.
So Anna asks, what's your favorite camera and lens?
Favorite and what I use are not necessarily the same, because I have difficulty carrying very heavy weight loads. And so I probably would have a big long lens if I didn't hate carrying it. So, but our family is a Canon family. And so I used to use various Canon lenses. But right now I have a PowerShot SX70, I think is what it is, which is not as good a resolution as some of the big good ones, but I can carry it. And as a matter of fact, it'll fit in a big pocket if I have one. And So it's handy and I like it that way. And it takes perfectly good telephoto pictures. They just might not be as quite as clear and as some of the big ones.
Mary asked, did you get the Himalayan snowcock in your
Yes.
EVA?
So I did. I went out there with one friend, and we just got up really early in the morning and hiked up for an area we thought we could get it, and we didn't get it. So that was that. And I vowed I'd go back. And I looked into the helicopter business of the way the Big Year people did it in the movie The Big Year. And then couldn't find anybody that did that, and I didn't really like that anyway. So then I went back myself in late summer. And I took a tent and I backpacked up with a tent and a sleeping bag and the whole thing and stayed overnight in the area that I had gone up with my other friend. At this time I'm by myself because she was not interested in trying again. And in the really early wee hours, I got up and it was dark out and I heard the sound. I heard them. And then I saw one way up in the cliff, and there was another woman out there who I guess had hiked up that night before, who had a tripod, and we both saw them up there. I got a crappy picture, which I've never shown. I don't show because it looks like sort of like the rocks. I mean, it's up there, but it's pointless to show the picture. But she and I both got them that morning. Yeah.
Awesome. Tom, I mentioned he got great photos of a dipper in Glacier Park in National Park last summer. Dave asks, did you see the Alpamido falcon in Texas or Blackhawk?
Blackhawk, yes. The Appomattox falcon, at the time I was doing it, was not countable. They were all released birds. And so they're all over the place. They're all over the place in South Texas. Oh, not all over, but you can easily see them in South Texas, but they were not countable. So I don't.
So they hadn't reestablished their breeding population then yet?
They're trying to do. Yeah, they're hacking them. They're putting out all over the place. So yeah. I also want to mention a little bit about the Himalayan snowcock. When I did, my father died in '98, but before he died, and I was talking to him about my birding thing, and he was saying something about, oh, so what bird would you like? He was not a birder. What birds do you want to see that you haven't ever seen? And I said, oh, there's this bird called the Himalayan snowcock. And I told him about this bird that had been really, brought in from the Himalayas, I guess, and released as a game bird and was now wild. But you had to either, fly in or take a horseback ride in or something like that. And my father looked really seriously at me and he said, don't do it until after I'm dead. Because he was so worried that I was going to crash a plane, or I don't know what he was worried about. But anyway, I waited till after he died, I guess. So, anyway.
So Mary asked, was Phoebe Snetzinger an idol for you? And those that don't know Phoebe, she was I think still has the most number of birds that seen.
Right. I think, yeah, she is. I wasn't aware of her early on. I mean, by the time I really became aware of her, it was not long before she died. But yeah, so
yeah,
I guess I'm extreme, but I think she was too extreme. And the little bit I know about her.
For those that don't know, I don't think she took up birding really seriously until she retired. Is that correct? When she was in her 60s?
I don't know, but all I know is, I mean, I was at a couple places where leaders were going out to get her, or had seen her recently, or had taken her someplace. I mean, I don't know exactly where she found her money, but part of the problem is, she would go fly to an island in the, somewhere, and for a bird, and another. I mean, and there were thousands and thousands of birds she's doing this for, and I'm like, oh yeah. So.
Yeah, and she ended up dying in a bus accident on Madagascar, I believe.
Madagascar, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. She was up birding in Madagascar.
So some Miles asked, how do you plan your budget?
Well, okay, so after I did, this sort of answers the question. After I did my Texas big year and set the record, a really good friend of mine, birder friend, gave me the book, The Big Year, about these guys doing the ABA big year. And I read it. I knew it existed, and I had actually didn't want to read it. And I keep seeing her at Fort Worth Audubon board meetings, because we were both on the board, and she'd say, have you read the book yet, The Big Year yet? And I'd go, not yet. And I didn't want to read it because I knew it would do what it did, which is get me wanting to do that, the big year across the whole US and Canada. And so, okay, I read it and I got really excited. And I sat down and did a calculation of budget on how much it would cost to do that, sort of the way they seem to do it. And, you know, counting up, going this place, looking up how much it costs to fly there, doing it all, and realized that was impossible, absolutely impossible. And I told my husband about my calculations, and we both thought, forget that. And then I realized I wouldn't have to do it quite like that. And I wouldn't have to do exactly what they went, do everything that way. And I wouldn't have to hire guides everywhere I went, and so, et cetera, et cetera. And so I sort of figured it out. And eventually, of course, I did the big year. And the problem with the budget is, as I mentioned earlier in this whole presentation, you got to look at your credit cards. Well, a lot of that year was charged to a credit card, and brought our credit card bill up high. You know, we were not quite keeping up with it. It got a little out of our way. So it took a couple of years to bring, you know, get back to where we zeroed out our balance every month. So it really wasn't budgeted. It just, you know, it exceeded the budget, and tried not to do that again. So.
What's your favorite brand of binoculars?
My favorite brand is no longer made. It's called Brunton. And I still have one Brunton. And the wonderful thing about them was they could focus up to down to 3 feet from you. So you could look at a butterfly or a very close warbler in focus really well. But because the focusing mechanism was so, I don't know what, it would go out of function. But the Brunton people would replace the binocular for nothing. So over the time period while they were making them and while I was using them, I got 3 different pairs of Brunton binoculars, and they would just send you a brand new pair every time it went out. You just tell them and off it would go. But they don't do that anymore. So my last pair I only use they're my in-house binoculars. And I don't use them that much because I don't want them to go. And so now I'm on Zeiss right now. So I don't really have a favorite other than the ones that I've used. I haven't exhaustively researched it.
Given all the big years you've done, would you do another?
I don't know. And I did this similar talk like this at the Wassa Bird Club, the Wassa Bird Club meeting in January was poems, and I wrote a poem about doing big years, which you'll be delighted to know I don't have anywhere near me, so I won't read to you. But and I ended it with the last verse about, so, you know, what do you think? Am I doing a Wisconsin big year? Because here I am. And I don't know if I am or not. I'm doing what I'm calling exploring Wisconsin sort of intensely on checking out its birds. And we're only in February, so it remains to be seen. But I won't do another ABA big year, for sure. Nor a world big year, for sure.
So Loris had a comment here. Phoebe's father had started a company in Chicago and left her a fair amount of money. That's kind of where she.
Okay, yeah. So my father left my sister and I their house, and I spent my share of it going on foreign birding trips. It lasted a couple years.
Mary has said, I heard Phoebe missed her own child's wedding to run off to find a bird.
Yeah, I know. I've heard all these stories. I have no idea how much it was, but I do know that. I try, actually. I'm involved in a lot of things that are not bird related. I usually cut back on a birding big year during birding big year, and like the big years that I've done, those ones I've talked to you about, I've sent out emails to everybody I knew saying, I'm going to do a big year, you know, let me know if you see anything good. And I've told all the groups that I was involved in, I might miss things. But I normally don't. I do a lot of things while I'm still doing a big year.
Another question. Did you get a northern mockingbird in Alaska?
No, there was not one seen that year. I don't know. There's hardly ever one seen in Alaska, but there wasn't definitely one that year.
So I'm gonna throw out
I
the
would like
last.
one in, I would like one in Wisconsin, though. I intend to go find one. That one I keep seeing. I've seen a couple of reports, but I haven't yet tried to find it.
You know, I don't think I've ever had one in Wisconsin. I know they've
There
been.
was a report earlier this year, I think, or
Yeah.
late last year. I can't remember.
We actually had one on at the Horicon Bird Festival a couple years ago, and I never did get to see it.
Oh,
So,
huh.
but I'm not much of a chaser, but I certainly enjoy. I do a kind of a county year every year, so you know, it challenges me. I kind of challenge myself to find things in my own backyard. You know, so that's always
Right. Well, that's why I'm so delighted with my varied thrush. It's my
Yeah.
yard bird.
So kind of last call for questions, and then I know Leslie Anich wanted to bring up about this year's coming Sandhill crane count. So Leslie, can you chime in a little bit?
Yep. Okay. The International Crane Foundation has set this year's annual crane count for Saturday, April 9th. And I am the Dodge County coordinator for that. I've got about 6 counters already confirming that they will do their areas again this year, but we could always use more. So you can reach me. I can put my email address in the chat if you want, but we do have some areas in the county that could use some counters. We're pretty much covered. Horicon Marsh is all covered. Mud Lake is all covered. I mean, the major areas are, but there are some empty areas like in the middle of the county.
All right, thanks, Leslie.
Somebody asked for my contact information. I'll put it in the chat.
So in addition to doing all these big years, you wrote books. Was that kind of in between? Was that kind of like recapturing the moment? Was that a highlights or until
I mean, the first one is about my ABA big year. I actually wrote a book about my Texas big year, but could not get it published. I spent a lot of time not getting it published, so I just put it aside. But I'd met the editor from Texas A&M University Press during that process, and they already had published a book about a Texas big year book, and they didn't want to do another one, and by somebody else. And so I told her I was going to do an ABA big year. She was a birder, is a birder. She said, well, if you write that up, we'll look at it. So that's the one they published, the first one. And then my husband and I were celebrating the fact that I'd finished that, getting that through the editorial process. And we went out to dinner, and he said, so now what are you going to do? Because he knows I don't sit still much. And he said, you should do something about rare birds or birds that are getting extinct or something. So that's what the second book is. It's Birds in Trouble. And then the third book was written just before the pandemic and came out the first month of the pandemic, on not by plan. That's just what it turned out, which is comparing my book birding big years in Texas and Alaska. And all 3 are published by Texas A&M University Press. But that woman that was my friend, the editor, she became the whole editor of the whole press, but she just retired. So if I want to get something published by them, I have to deal with it.
So do you use eBird quite a bit now, Lynn?
Oh, heavenly days, yes. I don't know what the record is, but I am up to almost 1,900 consecutive days of posting on eBird. It's 1800 something or other. I didn't look recently, but, and so on one of my bird trips, when I was in the air and not much on land, somewhere in the middle there, I was scared to death. I was going to not get a bird to post on eBird at all. And at an airport, I think DFW airport, at Dallas Fort Worth airport, walking between terminals, I got a house sparrow, and that was it for eBird that day. So that was the low. So, but yes, I use it to put my records on, but I also use it to find out stuff. I mean, I find it wonderfully valuable.
I've
there are
vowed
a lot of things it doesn't do that I wish it could do. Like I would like it to. I think I can't easily find out, like my Marathon County where I live now list for this year easily. I mean, I can find a list for any one hotspot or something, but to group all the list for I can get the number of birds, but getting that list, I haven't yet figured that out. But so anybody that has that information, let me know.
Yeah, I like, hopefully this year, my biggest streak, I think, is 88 days. And I hope I started in December, so I hopefully get 2022 one every day. That would be my goal, but I can't begin to imagine 1800 or 1900 days. Oh my
It does
gosh.
make you pay attention to birds, that's for sure. By the way, I posted my contact information, I think, in the chat. Did it go? I can't see it in there. Is it
Yeah,
there?
yep. I
Okay,
think
okay, all
it
right.
was in there.
Okay.
So Miles Herbert says I can help you with that Marathon County list.
Oh, goody. Okay, all right. I will talk to you soon then.
Let's see. I know it was here somewhere. Janet says, wonderful presentation. I enjoyed your photos and video. Enjoy spring birding in Wisconsin. Thank you for what you do.
Question of spring birding in Wisconsin. I want to go. I haven't been to Horicon since I moved back, and I want to be. Used to go when I lived in Madison, go up there more. So when is a good time to start getting things coming into Horicon? Anything? I mean, ducks or anything?
Late March, early April.
Okay.
When the ice starts to break up. And then April through early June, probably,
Okay. All right.
I'd say our bird festival is Mother's Day weekend.
Yep, I'll write that down.
So with that, anybody last call for questions or anything?
Oh yeah, then, Jeffrey.
Yes.
Oh yeah, speaking of ducks, I've been seeing early ducks like common mergansers, mallards, stuff that comes in early. You're at Bachman's Pond.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, there's probably like common mergansers pop. I know they hang around certain stretches like at Sauk City but usually by the last weekend February there's a little bit of a movement. I don't know if we're going to get it this year. It looks like next week we may get a bunch of snow and cold again, so it might be first week in March. But okay, here's I have Lynn's contact information. Thank you very much, Lynn. So I will. Yeah, wonderful presentation. Oh my gosh, I can't begin to fathom the. So what's your total life list?
I don't know. I'm always so keyed into an annual list. I mean, I don't know my Alaska life list. Because I got over 300 birds. I'm in the 200 and the 300 club. Very few people had seen over 300 birds in their lifetime in Alaska, but I don't know my whole list. My world list last time I was thinking about it all was like 3,000 or something, but that's been a long time ago. I don't know if I've added that many anyway. So most of
So
the birds that are, yeah.
So internationally, what's your next target or a place you
I
would?
don't, I don't know, because of the virus, I've basically stopped flying. So internationally, it's hard to get anywhere without flying. So I don't know. We'll hope someday maybe you'll fly again. I don't know.
All right. So thank you very much. With that, I think I'm going to end it. Wonderful presentation. We will. I need your. I'll email you, Lynn. Okay.
All right.
We have a honorarium we can send you, so we'll get your address and everything.
All right.
So
Thank you.
all right.
Thank you
So
much.
that. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation.
Thanks.